Hello, welcome from the First United Methodist Church in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. This week I'm going a little bit out on a limb with the sermon. I had chosen a whole bunch of texts that had to do with towers before Christmas, and I intend to follow through on this. But the one I came to today spoke in a very particular kind of a way to some of the things that have been going on in the time since Christmas. And it's always a tricky thing to deal with a text from one of the Old Testament prophets because you run into a couple possibilities. One is to turn it into uh, a history lesson about the life and politics of ancient Israel or Judah. And the other is that you somehow apply it way too easily and too simplistically to current affairs. When you're looking at the prophets and they say we, they're talking about the people of God. They're not talking about um, a political kingdom. But as they understood it, that particular country, that particular nation, that particular people, and the people of God were completely overlapping. And that's not the case in our day. And yet, we as human beings live both with an awareness of nationality and locality and with a sense of belonging to God's people. And we sort of go back and forth among those different sets of belonging in very complicated ways. The sermon that I'm going to record this week bounces around a little bit that way too. And it's not meant to be uh, a political commentary, but it does have to do with the experiences that the people I live among and belong to are going through at this particular moment in time. If at some point you think I've gone way off, feel free to turn off the video. If you think it makes sense, I'm grateful to God. It's not me that gets things, it's us talking together, living together, praying together, and worshiping together, which I invite you now to do. These words come to us from the prophet Isaiah, the 21st chapter, verses 6 through 10. For thus the Lord said to me, Go, post a lookout, let him announce what he sees. When he sees riders, horsemen in pairs, riders on donkeys, riders on camels, let him listen diligently, very diligently. Then the watcher called out, Upon a watchtower I stand, O Lord, continually by day, and at my post I am stationed throughout the night. Look, there they come, riders, horsemen in pairs. Then he responded, Fallen is Babylon, and all the images of her gods lie shattered on the ground. O my threshed and winnowed one, what I have heard from the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, I announce to you. Have you or have you not, in the last week, heard somebody say, or maybe you've said yourself, are we going to make it? Or what exactly is going on? What's going to happen to us? And that's not just a rhetorical turn of speech. People have actually come up to me in my professional capacity and said, are we going to make it? What is going to happen to us? And on the most basic level, what I hear is that there are people who are afraid, who have deep, deep misgivings about events that are beyond their control, worried that things may happen that destroy their physical safety in the way that their emotional safety has already been ripped up. They're asking questions that could be personalized. Will I have a job in 4 years? Is my child or my grandchild going to be protected from measles, mumps, and rubella? Will there be bananas and tomatoes in the grocery store? And if there are, will I be able to afford them? Are my neighbors, my coworkers, my family going to be deported? Will my best friend be stripped of her citizenship? Those questions are there. And I'll tell you flat out that I don't know how to answer them. I cannot tell the future, and I wouldn't want to if I could, but I can't. But I can see the present, and I can hear what the person in front of me is saying, and they're scared. Now, I also do know some people who do not share those misgivings at all. I do know people who say, really, what are you guys worried about? Well, to such people, I would say, look, at least recognize that the people around you are scared. your neighbors are scared. And maybe you don't understand why, and maybe you don't share their fear. And maybe it will all blow over. But right now, right now, intentionally or unintentionally, people are frightening them. If we look at what is in front of us, not what's ahead, but just what's in front of us, we can see frightened people. Centuries ago, the Lord spoke to a man in Jerusalem, a priest named Isaiah, the cousin of the king. And the Lord told him to do something that's kind of kingly himself, to send out watchmen onto the towers of Jerusalem. There always would be soldiers posted on the towers. And their jobs were not to make predictions about what the future would hold, but to keep their eyes present about what was going on the ground. They're lifted up onto the towers so that they can see farther away, but their real job is to look at how things are, as we would say, on the ground, in the moment. And then to let the city officials, the royal officials, their commanders, whoever was listening, to let them know what they had seen and heard. For thus the Lord said to me, "Go, post a lookout. Let him announce what he sees." No doubt there was a lot that was unremarkable, that would have not jumped out at a watchman. There would be farmers bringing their produce in the gates early in the morning and leaving, hopefully, with an empty cart in the afternoon. There would be herdsmen driving sheep or cattle to the market or to the temple for sacrifice. There would be pilgrims and priests on their way to the temple. There would be merchants and traders of every sort stopping as they made their way from one part of the world to another. But there would also be unusual travelers from far away who might be talking about the weighty matters of the day, the things that were going on in the world at large that might impinge on the lives of all those other people who were just going through their daily business. And those people, they might have news that could help or hurt the people of Jerusalem going in and out of the city gates. The people who lived inside the city and the people who lived in the lands surrounding it, visible to the watchman in the distance and beyond that. And when those travelers with that kind of information were going through the city walls, the watchman's job was not simply to see them, but to hear them and to listen. When he sees riders, horsemen in pairs, riders on donkeys, riders on camels, let him listen diligently, very diligently. There's a kind of urgency to that sort of watching and listening. It's 24-hour news coverage. Then the watcher called out, "Upon a watchtower I stand, O Lord, continually by day. And at my post I'm stationed throughout the night." Now, there is something that I find strange about that assignment and how it turns out. And it probably comes, the nearest I can figure it, it comes from watching too many action movies when I was a kid. Because I picture watchmen on a city wall, sort of walking up and down with a spear over one shoulder and a shield in the other hand, and they're looking out every few paces and seeing if there's somebody on the horizon, an approaching enemy, an entire army waiting to pounce on this city. Or I picture a Western where it would be a single sentry in a square tower perched on the edge of a wooden fort. And he'd be watching out and he'd see just a dust cloud. And then suddenly, where he's looking, up over a hill comes a raiding party. And he has to grab his bugle and start blowing it as loudly as he can right away before the raiding party pounces down on the fort. And there's something in Isaiah that's akin to that. Look, here they come, riders, horsemen in pairs. But they're not the same kind of riders, are they? It's something different going on that the watchmen are supposed to spot. It's not attackers so much as it describes soldiers who may have fled a battle that went against them, stragglers, people riding away from something. It sounds to me almost like people who have escaped from some sort of horrible situation. And in fact, the news that they bring is the news that would come from people who had been through something traumatic. Then he responded, fallen is Babylon, and all the images of her gods lie shattered on the ground." These riders, these horsemen in pairs, they come from the fallen city. They come from a place whose own walls and whose own towers have been utterly destroyed. Fallen is Babylon. So I say to people in our own day, listen closely. Listen closely, but not to the people that you know, not to the people who are inside the walls that you seek to protect, but who are outside your walls. Hear what those people say to one another and what they have to tell. And that is when you will hear what is going on in the absolutely widest sense that you can. But that has to come with a warning. O my threshed and winnowed ones, what I have heard from the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, I announce to you. In the Old Testament, in both the prophets and in the histories, Babylon is a real place, an actual city, the capital of an empire, one that had been growing and expanding and trying to take over the entire known world. On the other hand, there was another empire, and it was the other side of Jerusalem, Egypt. Egypt was also eager to expand and to take over more and more land. And so on this side, you have Babylon. On this side, you have Egypt. In between, you have Jerusalem. And it's always getting mashed up and slammed in between them. For the news to come that Babylon had fallen doesn't mean that Egypt had fallen. It would be good news because people from Jerusalem had been carried off and would be carried off again into exile in Babylon. Jerusalem was still threatened by Egypt over here, but some of the pressure was off, and things would not be as desperate. So the fall of Babylon would restore some degree of security. It would ease up on the danger that the people lived with for centuries. Now, in the New Testament, you're dealing with a different empire. You're dealing with Rome. And Rome controlled Jerusalem. Rome controlled all the places where there would be Christians. There were Jews in other empires, in the Persian Empire, that was off in the area of Babylon still. But the New Testament, that was written to people who were living under the Romans, who didn't like criticism. And there was a man whose name was John, who had visions of what God would have in store as far as protecting the Christians that Rome was trying to get just as surely as the Babylonians and the Egyptians had been out to get the Jews. For that matter, Rome was out to crush the Jews as well. The Christians, as far as they were concerned, were only a weird subset of this odd group in Jerusalem. And so when in the New Testament we hear about Babylon, sometimes it means Rome. But it came to mean more than that. It came to represent any kind of system that would set itself up to crush God's people, or that would crush God's people incidentally as it went about the business of exercising raw power without mercy or without restraint. And the vision of Babylon that comes not to Isaiah, but to this man, John, in the New Testament, includes some of the same words. John would directly echo Isaiah when he said, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. John saw a future where all empires that seek to exercise power without reference to right or wrong would come under God's judgment. And God would not allow it. In the words of Julia Ward Howe. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. And she drew that directly from John in the book of Revelation. When you start talking about Babylon in that sense, and all the Babylons that have followed, then it's no longer a simple matter of nation versus nation, but it becomes a matter of power used for oneself, power used for one's own ethnic group, one's tribe, one's nation, or the power of God supporting his people when the other group is not. It's no longer a simple message about politics. It's a matter of faithfulness to God, despite whatever is happening on the national or international level. Again, test what I'm saying here. Test it out for yourself. Unlike Isaiah, unlike John, I am no prophet. But what I see, I think you will see. And maybe you will see things that I don't, but when we see it together, we get a fuller picture. Nevertheless, I am about to make a probably foolish statement about the very questions that I started this sermon with, the very questions that I have been asked about our current national and international situation. And my answer is going to be yes, but to remind you of the questions. Are we going to make it? Yes, but who exactly do you mean by we when you ask that? And for that matter, what do you mean by make it? If we is American society as we've known it, it's pretty clear that the divisions that we've been dealing with, put it that way, go much deeper than the elections of the past few years. And there will have to be a lot of grace shown by everybody to everybody if we're going to get back to, or no, let's say go beyond what was the status quo, and definitely get beyond what we're going through now. Remember, even if the status quo was working, if that were the case, then we might not have to ask these questions. Questions again. What is going to happen to us? Again, if you mean by us, American society, as we have known it, I don't know. A whole lot depends how the other we, Jesus followers, people of good faith, people with a strong trust in a loving God, take the lead in loving God and neighbor, as we have been taught to do. And doing it at a moment when there are so many temptations and incentives not to do that. At a time when it has become easier day by day by day to get angry, and easier day by day to become frustrated with one another, and easier day by day to put the blame sometimes where it belongs and sometimes where it doesn't belong. So many incentives to go after each other. If by us you mean Jesus followers, then the answer to what is going to happen to us is that if we do follow Jesus faithfully, if we do reach out and love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and if we do at least try to love our neighbors as ourselves, then in any time of trial, whether it's a personal trial or a national trial or whatever, in any time of testing, we're going to come out of it. Yes, but not the way we came in. We'll come out of it better. Better people, humbled people, better people, wiser people, better people with more faith, better people with some scars and some losses, better people with grief for the things that might have been, better people with hope and a vision of what can be by God's grace. Will we be the same? No, not the same. Nor will we be finished, because our God is marching on.